All right, we're kind of getting towards the end here, and great that we've still got so many people, actually. I know we've got Kevin coming up after, so you got to stay for Kevin. So I'm going to talk about NetExperience. I'll cover what we do, how we do it, but also I'm going to cover some example deployments, some real-world examples, not just the one that Bob talked about, which is great, but I've got some additional ones. And I'll talk a little bit about our roadmap. So about NetExperience, we are an OpenWiFi software company. We don't make any hardware. We use, we're kind of like Chester in that respect, in that we use the ODM's hardware, or OEM's hardware. We have a platform that runs in the cloud on AWS and GCP today, but you could potentially run it on OpenStack. It's a microservices Kubernetes cluster. And kind of, I think the thing that makes us a little bit unique here is that we've talked about the cloud platform, but we're not just a cloud software company. We're also an access point embedded firmware company. So we actually are a contributor and a maintainer of the firmware that runs inside the access points. And I'll show you why that's important a little bit later. Unlike Tim, we do say that we are a single throat to choke. There's always some problems sometimes from some deployments. And I think the fact that we have the ability, what we say basically is, if you deploy a solution using an OpenWiFi solution using NetExperience, you pretty much never call the hardware vendors. You call NetExperience. We take, even though it's not our hardware, we take responsibility for the entire solution. And that is because when there are problems, I'd say 99.99% of the time, it's a software problem. It's somewhere in the firmware or it's somewhere in the cloud. Well, as you can see, we have expertise on both of those. So we basically say, whatever the problem is, we can fix it. Every now and then, of course, there may be a real hardware problem, in which case we would triage that with the hardware vendor. So we build on the open source, and I'll show you that in a bit more detail. And of course, we've tested with many of the vendors of the hardware. So why are people deploying OpenWiFi? Why are we having some success here? And I think there are a number of reasons why. The first is this vendor lock elimination that Bob talked about a little bit. So it's a single platform with multiple hardware vendors. It's also one platform for multiple use cases. This isn't a point design solution. This is applicable, obviously, to MDUs, hospitality, but potentially to other markets, including enterprise, as we go forward. Really, it's really dependent on the access points that are on the left-hand side of this diagram. That kind of determines the use case. Start using, a lot of outdoor stuff. You can do public Wi-Fi, these sort of things. On the left-hand side there, you see TIP APs. Of course, TIP doesn't make APs. Those are the multiple manufacturers. We've got EdgeCore and Action Tech represented here today. And the kind of unique thing is you can literally mix and match those in the same network, in the same deployment. And we have quite a few examples where that's actually the case. You may prefer one outdoor AP from one vendor and a different indoor one from a different vendor, and you can mix and match those. Probably the third point here is maybe the biggest bullet point that also Bob went on, and that is, of course, it is a fairly significant cost savings over the traditional branded solutions. And we also, because we sell not just to MSPs, we also sell to some national communications providers. We have this model where you can start by using our SaaS platform, but as you grow and as you start deploying thousands, tens of thousands and beyond, we are able to license the entire stack to run in their own environment, in their own data center. And I think another thing that I'll talk a little bit later is the open APIs. And of course, as Tim covered a lot on the switches side, that's a key part, I think, of the overall deployment of OpenWiFi. If we look at the key platform, don't worry, I'm not going to go through all of these. I'm just going to broadly talk about these three buckets. So what is in this platform? Well, it's the sort of things that expect to be there. It's a full wireless LAN controller. So it does all the things you'd expect from the big brands. It does, automatic channel selection, cell sizing, client steering, band steering, those kind of functionalities. The RRM part, basically. But in addition to that, in the middle section there, it's the network and workflow management. It's very easy to deploy 100 access points. It's a little more difficult to deploy 1,000. It's really tough to deploy 10,000, 100,000 and beyond. So how do you do that? You have to have consistency of configuration. So we have a location hierarchy methodology that allows you to apply profiles to a location and inherit that down in the sublocations. So when you plug an access point into a specific location, it inherits that profile, which means you've got consistency of configuration. This eliminates human error, which is most often the cause of failure. There's a lot of other functions as part of that. You can see there, obviously, alarms and inventory and troubleshooting tools. On the third bucket, something that we've been really supportive from day one, a little bit further down there. Of course, Bob talked a little bit on the MPSK side for MDUs. But I think one of the other things that we've been very strong proponents of, and the WA, of course, BA supports, is the open roaming and Passpoint. We've done that from day one as part of our deployments. We try with every single customer we get. We encourage them to deploy with open roaming, and most of them do. So I'm not going to talk in detail on this one either. You'll be also happy to know. But this is really just to point out, well, where does this open source start and finish? And where does NetExperience start and finish? So open source, in my mind, is it's not a product. I think even Jack would say it's not a product. Open source, I sort of think of it as like a set of building blocks that you can use to produce a product. So if you look at this diagram here, on the bottom, we've got the access points. And the AP NOS is the open source, and it's colored in blue. And then in the cloud side, there's an SDK layer colored in blue. So those are the open source building block stuff. And then the stuff in green is the stuff that NetExperience adds. So on the access points, some people are kind of look at that and they see that's a bit strange. Why have we got some additional firmware running on the access points when it should just be open source? Well, the fact is, if you connected an open source access point to our platform, it'll work fine. But it won't work quite as efficiently, and it probably will miss a few of the key additional features that are in the green on the top portion, which is the cloud. So it just adds a little bit of additional functionality. Let's say you deployed NetExperience, and then you say, I really hate NetExperience. I want to, because this is sort of vendor agnostic, can I move software vendors? That's one of the questions I get. Unfortunately for me, you can, but you can basically upgrade or downgrade the APs back to the standard AP NOS and connect to different cloud controller. It is perfectly possible to do that. So if we look now at where the markets are for OpenWiFi, where have we had some success so far? So the first one is the MDU and student housing. And Bob kind of got through this a little bit too. I think what I would call this is a stressed business case. Ultimately, the people that are buying it are end consumers. And in the case of student housing, they're not very well off consumers either. So it has to meet the economics, and yet it still also has to meet the performance requirements. And students in particular, actually quite hard on the Wi-Fi. They want very low latency. They're doing gaming, all this kind of stuff that puts a lot of stress. So it has to be well managed. So you've got a platform that can manage it very well, but do it at a cost point that meets the market. Hospitality, of course, a secondary market that we've also done quite a few deployments with, actually all around the world. And senior living, I'd kind of put almost in the first one there. And then probably third and fourth, the public Wi-Fi. In particular, we've seen public Wi-Fi deployments in developing nations, not necessarily in North America, but in developing nations, it's a lot more popular to have like coupon-based connections to Wi-Fi. And then education, also probably at this point more in developing countries. But we do have, we've been doing this for a while now. We've got interest certainly starting in the enterprise markets and in particular in the residential markets. And I'll come on to why that is in a minute. The types of service providers that we sell to, the obvious ones are kind of Wi-Fi focused service providers, and folks like Boingo, good examples of that. Developing country incumbents and competitive carriers. I'll come on to one of those momentarily. And the ISP and managed service providers who are looking to lower those costs and improve that manageability. And then last but not least, we've got some very large, if you like, multifaceted service providers that basically do everything. And I'll explain who some of those folks are. Some examples. So I put Boingo here. This is one that we've had Dr. Derek and his folks have been customers of ours now for about 2 years, deployed a few thousand access points in the US barracks. In fact, it's not a DoD network, it's for where the soldiers go to kind of watch movies and things like that. So it was kind of an interesting one because we did this with Action Tech. And they were very early in deploying 6 gigahertz. In fact, so early that we turned the 6 gigahertz off to start with, because it was a couple of years ago. But they deploy the Action Tech 196 6E APs. Another one I talked about was YTL. YTL is a national Malaysian operator. We also did this with Action Tech. They are very broad-based conglomerate, actually, not just telecoms. They own 100 plus hotels, and they're looking to basically replace. They've got some very old Wi-Fi. I was just in Malaysia, staying at a couple of their hotels, and they're very, very old Wi-Fi that's not working well. It's well beyond its end of life, and so there's a need for them to do some significant replacements there. And in fact, we'll probably work with Bob's group to help them do that. Pavlov Media, I put this one down because just to full disclosure here, that's our parent company. Pavlov Media acquired NetExperience a short while ago. However, we operate completely independently from Pavlov Media. They do not interfere with us. We do not share information with them because obviously we're selling to Pavlov Media's competitors as well as to other folks. And we have to make sure that that's the case, and we can provide those kind of assurances. But Pavlov themselves, well, they're well over 10,000. They're probably closer to 15,000 APs deployed today. And this is actually their really, really busy time because a lot of their stuff is student housing. And of course, the students are off June, July, August. So this is when they do the vast majority of their deployments. So there's a lot of APs going in every day right now. And the last one I'll talk about is kind of an interesting one. So it's a very large Indian operator. Let's put that, like probably the largest Indian operator. This is an interesting one because their quest was to find a solution that will scale to potentially millions of APs. So this is kind of a lot of work going in on the scalability of the solution. And for those of you that might be interested, we've done, obviously we haven't deployed millions of APs, so how do you prove that? Well, there's ways to do it by writing test suites and things and putting in a massive AWS instance to fire tests against and mimic it, simulate the entire solution, and we've got some reports. This solution scales really well. And then we have a whole bunch of other deployments I'm not going to talk about today. So last slide, I won't go through this in detail either. I think if you really want to know the roadmap stuff, please let me know. Just ping me and we can go through this in more detail. But there's really a couple of major things. I think the thing that Tim covered was a really, really huge step forward in 2024, which was, of course, the addition of Open LAN switch. This was a really kind of a missing piece in my mind. It's solved, it's great. I think we're going to have a lot of success as we start to add the open LAN switches into these deployments that I mentioned previously and others. Other areas that I think might be obvious, but I'll state them anyway, of course, is we are pushing very hard now with Wi-Fi 7. We've got both EdgeCore and Action Tech access points outside on the table there that are Wi-Fi 7 APs with the latest TIP load. We are working with them and with TIP to get this released as quickly as possible on the NetExperience platform. So really, we're probably just weeks, maybe a month or so away from doing that. And then, of course, as we move into next quarter, we're going to be also trying to integrate with the outdoor Wi-Fi 7 standard power with all the AFC stuff that we need to do. And then I probably need to say the one word that everybody says on the stage, I think, and that's AI ML. So of course we have AI ML. So we've been working with a couple of universities for literally the last 2 years on AI as applied to network algorithms, in particular wireless network algorithms. There's a lot of work, there's a lot of PhD students and stuff that have been working on this stuff. And we have some early phases. I'd say that it's still pretty early. We've got to do a lot of training with a lot of data in order to really make these algorithms work. That's the way machine learning works, of course. So as we go through, I think probably more like 2025, we'll start to release some of those AI functionality. So the idea is, of course, to detect and correct any issues that you see on the network, whether wireless or wired, without human intervention, and do it in machine speed, not human speed. And of course, the one that you see on all of those quarters there, of course, is scalability enhancements. As I say, we're working with that very large Indian operator, and that's really their #1 focus for us. So I think that is the end. Any questions? You don't have to ask an obligatory question.
No. I'm performing the role of Tiago and team in this case. You mentioned on one slide, a future roadmap possibility that included residential. Can you see a time where the open Wi-Fi community could unify the industry and provide residential and enterprise Wi-Fi using the same stack?
I do. I mean, if you go back to one of the very early slides there, and I said multiple use cases, pretty much any use case could be done with open Wi-Fi. It really, I think Bernard, my CEO, always used to say, well, in the cellular world, you just have one network for everything. You don't have an enterprise network and a residential network, but in Wi-Fi, we've had these sort of siloed approaches, which is like really odd. When we've got an enterprise version here, we've got a hospitality one type here, we've got a residential one over here, and they don't really intermix. I think that this flattens that architecture, and we end up with one architecture for all Wi-Fi use cases. All right, thank you.